Carla with Race to Walk, and thanks for joining me. And today I'm going to be doing a review on Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus by Nabeel Qureshi, which is a testimony of a man who was raised as a Muslim but found Jesus when he went searching for the truth. But before we get started, a little bit about this channel. Here we share good thoughts about good words, and on Tuesdays I publish videos about books, and then on Fridays I host a live Bible study on Instagram at Race to Walk, and then I upload that here later to YouTube. So if you would like to get updates about any of those things, then be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to hit the bell for notifications so you can get updates about new videos. So a few months ago when I did a video on my top 5 apologetics books, I asked what other books people would recommend as their top books in apologetics. And one of the commenters mentioned this book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, as their top book in apologetics. And I had read the book, and I actually took a class on Islam and Christianity from Nabeel Qureshi at Houston Baptist University. So we read his personal testimony, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, as well as his other book, No God But One, in preparation for that class. The first time I read it, the story, his life story, was what stood out to me more. But as I went through it again for this video, I realized that what the commenter had said was true, that this is really a very good book on apologetics. So Nabeel Qureshi was raised as, in a Muslim family, and he lived here in the U.S. planning on becoming a doctor, and he went to medical school and encountered a Christian that changed his life. And you may be familiar with this person. His name is David Wood. He actually has a ministry, Acts 17 Apologetics, and this gives a story of his encounter with David and the way that David challenged him about his beliefs. Now, when I was taking the class, I actually I'd watched a couple of David Wood's videos several years before. He was having all those conflicts in Dearborn, Michigan, and I had always thought of it as kind of a warning to Americans about the truth about Islam. But I never really thought of it as evangelistic, because I was in the class, I said, well, you guys were friends. He didn't talk to you like he talks to people on the videos, did he? And Nabeel said, no, he talked to me exactly like that. It's exactly the way the conversations went, because they were roommates, actually. I think he thought I was being critical of David's approach, and I wasn't. I was just thinking, what he was saying was true. I just didn't really think of it as evangelism. I don't know. And he said that is one of the most effective ministries I've ever seen. He said Muslims are hard-headed. You have to, have a strong response. And he said that years later, people come back and tell them that they came to faith in Jesus and thank them. So the book tells a story about how he came to Jesus, but it also is educational in a way that it explains what Muslims believe. It explains different principles. One of the things that I thought was really good, it was really good about explaining how there could be such a variety in beliefs in Islam, that the Quran is made up of surahs, and unlike the Bible, where we interpret scripture in the context of scripture as a whole, in the Quran the surahs stand alone. So depending on who you're taught by and how that teacher interprets those surahs, you can have very, very different beliefs. And I think it helps give an understanding of their perspective, but it still reads like a story. It actually reminds me a lot of The Case for Christ, and how Lee Strobel's book educates, but it also does it as he tells a story. Just imagine this. Imagine being a Muslim and having David Wood as your best friend. So you can go and watch some of his videos. So go and imagine having some of those conversations. One of the quotes that I thought was really interesting, that didn't stand out to me until I just went through this a second time, he was talking about, you have to be willing to actually seek after truth. He writes, it was then that I realized the value of apologetics and what the arguments had done for me. He'd been going through months of these discussions about what was true and what was not. All my life, barriers have been erected that kept me from humbly approaching God and asking Him to reveal Himself to me. The arguments in apologetics tore down those barriers, positioning me to make a decision to pursue God or not. And then he writes, the work of my intellect was done. It had opened the way to His altar, but I had to decide whether I would approach it. If I did, and if I really wanted to know God, I had to cast myself upon His mercy and love, relying completely on Him and His willingness to reveal Himself to me, but at what cost? So one of the big issues that Nabeel had into before he accepted Jesus was just the concept of the Trinity, which a lot of people do. I mean, I think a lot of Christians accept the Trinity without really understanding it, but he had been through a number of arguments about it, but it was actually a science class that knocked down the final wall of understanding the truth of the Trinity. And he said, we sat front and center in Miss Adamski's lecture hall, not more than 3 feet from her as she taught. I vividly remember the exact location of my seat because it was there that I first opened up to the Trinity, a moment still etched in my mind. Projected in the front of the room were 3 large depictions of nitrates in bold black and white. We were studying resonance, the configuration of electrons in certain molecules. The basic concept of resonance is easy enough to understand even without a background in chemistry. Essentially, the building block of every physical object is an atom, a positively charged nucleus orbited by tiny negatively charged electrons. Atoms bond to one another by sharing their electrons, forming a molecule. Different arrangements of electrons in certain molecules are called resonance structures. Some molecules, like water, have no resonance, while others have 3 resonance structures or more, like the nitrate on the board. Although the concept was easy enough to grasp, the reality proved to be baffling. Mrs. Adamski concluded her lesson by commenting, "These drawings are just the best way to represent resonance structures on paper, but it's actually much more complicated. Technically, a molecule with resonance is every one of its structures at every point in time, yet no single one of its structures at any point in time." The rest of the class must have had the same expressions on their face that I did because Mrs. Adamski repeated herself. It's all the structures all the time, never just one of them. After another brief pause, she afforded us some reassurance. "But don't worry about that. You're only going to be tested on the structures we can draw." To which the class gave a collective sigh of relief. But not me. I turned to David, unable to get past what Miss Adamski had just said. David steadily shrugged and returned his attention to the professor as she moved to the next topic. It appeared I was the only one still thinking about the bomb she had just dropped. How could something be many things at once? Many different things. We were not talking about the attributes of something like a steak, which can be hot, juicy, thick, and tender all at once. We're talking about separate spatial and electrical arrangements. What the professor said would be akin to saying that Nabil is eating said steak in Texas while simultaneously napping in a hammock in the Caribbean. As wonderful as each would be individually, it made no sense to say I might be doing both at once. I was perplexed, and what made it even worse was that no one around me seemed to be bothered in the least. I looked around the room, agape at their blind acceptance. But was it really blind? The professor was teaching rarefied science, describing the subatomic world. At that level, things happened that make no sense to those of us who conceptualize the world at only a human level. Even the apparently simple idea of atoms is baffling when we think about it. It means that the chair I am sitting on is not actually a solid object innocently supporting my weight. It is almost entirely empty space, occupied only in small part by particles moving at incomprehensible speeds. When we think about it, it seems wrong, but it's just the way things are in our universe. There's no use arguing about it. I turned my glance away from the other students, concluding they had not blindly accepted a nonsensical concept. They had just realized, before I did, that there are truths about our universe that do not fit easily into our minds. My eyes rested on the 3 separate structures of nitrate on the wall, my mind assembling the pieces. One molecule of a nitrate is all 3 resonance structures all the time, and never just one of them. The 3 are separate, but all the same, and they are one. They are 3 in 1. That's when it clicked. If there are things in this world that can be 3 in 1, even incomprehensibly so, then why cannot God? And just like that, the Trinity became potentially true in my mind. I looked over at David and decided to say nothing. Later, I have revisited the doctrine of the Trinity with fresh perspective. What do Christians mean when they say God is 3 in 1? 3 what in 1 what? The doctrine of the Trinity teaches that God is 3 persons in one being. Being and person are not the same thing, which means the Trinity is not a contradiction. And then a little bit further, he writes, in fullness of time and without any productive discussion with David, I understood the Trinity on my own terms and realized it was a possible model of God's nature. And it was at that point that all the other bricks in the wall started to fall more quickly. And he actually went on to get a degree in apologetics. He was also working on his PhD in New Testament, but he actually contracted a really rare form of stomach cancer, and he passed away in September of 2017. He started doing regular vlogs with updates of his physical condition, when he was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and you can go to his channel and still see those and kind of see the rest of his story. And his widow has actually continued some of those videos. So one of the things that stood out to me as I was going through this again was that how much I think that even though his father at this point hasn't come to the same faith as Nabil, I think his father really had a lot to do with the fact that Nabil did eventually come to know Jesus, because I've talked several times about George MacDonald, who is a Scottish author that lived in the late 1800s that influenced a lot of writers in the 20th century. The biggest influence in his life was his father, who had such a wonderful character, and who was so kind. It was because of the fact that he had such a good father that George MacDonald rejected Calvinism. There's an account that when he heard about the doctrine of election that he burst into tears, and he rejected it because he knew a father's love, and he knew that could not possibly be true of God, because God's love God as a father has to be so much greater than any human father. And Nabil's father actually is in some of the videos before Nabil passed away, and then also after, and you can just tell in those videos he's just so sweet, and he's such a sweet person. And you see that in the book too, just how much love the family had, and you can just see that he's such a good father. I think that experiencing that goodness and recognizing that truth and rightness in a person, in a human person, as a human father, was something that Nabil knew that was true. And so as you read through this account, you see that it wasn't just strong arguments for Christianity that caused him to reject Islam. It was a lot of the falseness and wrongness in the Islamic beliefs and in Muhammad as a person. So this is a great book to read for a lot of reasons. Not only does it give you a good understanding about Islam and understand a little better how to have conversations and how to care for your Muslim friends, but it also gives a lot of hope that no matter how firmly entrenched you think somebody is in their beliefs, that God is always greater and he can call them out. I also think that it just shows how many different ways that to break through those barriers and to just call to people and bring them to him. So many different ways that we could never plan, that we could never foresee. I highly recommend reading this book, and if you've read this, please let me know what stood out most to you about this book. But thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.